Reverend Kesler will be talking to us about lots of things, I think, tonight. And I should probably stop talking right now, so and give her the floor and let her talk about it. But Reverend Kesler, welcome to the Knoxville History Project and our weekly show here.
Jack, thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here, and I appreciate all the kind affirmation that you always say and do. And Paul, I appreciate your support as well, so thank you. And Jack, I don't have the Bearden book, but I got to get, of course, I always have my Knoxville book, of course, and we sell those at BECKS. So, of course, I need to get some Bearden books now, just throwing that out there so we can make sure we have those available here as well. And I know several families in the Bearden area, so I can't wait to look through it and talk to them as well, because we were talking about this the other day. So thank you for all of the amazing work that you do, Jack. I appreciate it. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Delaney project, because I do think it's important. So as I'm preparing my thoughts and my comments for you tonight, I think Jack nailed it when he said, our world began to change. And for me, Renee Kesler personally, even today, I'm heavy. I have to be real honest and transparent with you. There's a lot of stuff happening in our world, and it is extremely heavy for me. Every morning when I wake up, I feel like this burden is on my shoulder to do something bigger than self. I'm thankful for Beck and for the work that we've been doing. And I'm also very grateful and thankful that everything we're doing is lining up. I've always said from the time I came to Beck that I would love for our community, for our city to be the model place, right? The place where people choose to come because we have a rich history, we have a rich cultural, we have rich community that genuinely has a beautiful respect and appreciation for one another. And I'm that hopeful person, although I can tell you my hope light is not as bright as it was, but I'm hanging in there with hope that we can take history, learn from it, and grow from it. So I'm hoping that history becomes the great truth teller, and it's what makes us better. So I want to, for those of you who may or may not know, I don't want to assume you know Beck, that you know where we began or how we started. So I thought I would start from the beginning and just briefly go through some important things, because everything from Beck's very beginning is rooted in everything we are experiencing today. And I think that's how I want to talk to you tonight. I want to talk to you from history, and at the same time, I want to have a conversation about what's happening today, because our history is a story that's nothing new. And everything that's happening today, we've already lived, we've already experienced. The issue or the challenge is, what have we learned? So we'll go with the first slide, Paul, and the Beck Mansion. For those of you who have never been to the Beck Mansion, that first slide, that's the actual original home. That home was originally built by James and Alice Saxton Cowan. It was built in 1912. And so that's the original mansion. That home will be occupied by Dr. E.F. Lennon. He'll purchase the Cowan estate in about 1946. The Cowans are going to be the first Black people to live in the area. So this is 1935 Dandridge Avenue. The home is going to become the center of cross burnings and warnings by the Ku Klux Klan, because this area of East Knoxville is not a predominantly Black area. It is still predominantly white. So the Cowan family are going to be the first family to live in this house. And then gradually, we're going to see the composition of the neighborhood begin to change. I like telling stories about Dr. Lennon because they always talked about how he was this staunch, very strong, charismatic physician who, believed in justice and equality and wasn't afraid of anything. In fact, they would tell stories about how in the middle of the night, the Klan would come out and burn a cross in the yard, and he would come outside in his pajamas and say something like, "I'm going to need you guys to clean this up when it's all over, because I'm not going to be cleaning this up in the morning." So he wasn't afraid of anyone. And he would literally just go out and confront them and then go right back in his pajamas and go to bed. The name, for some of you who are history buffs in Knoxville, is familiar because Lennon is going to be tied to the church, Lennon Senior United Methodist Church. That church is also on Dandridge Avenue on the corner, about a block from where the Beck is. And that's where it gets its name, from that family, part of that name. The other Sini part comes from a church that used to be over in what we call the Walter P. Taylor Home section. And when those churches merged, Sini and Lennon, they put it together for Lennon Sini United Methodist Church. The next slide, you'll see a picture again of the house. So after 1846, the Lennons will stay in the house for several years, and they will stay until about the late 1960s. And then a family will come by the name of Ethel and James Beck. Ethel Benson Beck and James Garfield Beck are very influential members of the Black community in the 1920s and 30s. I want to start with Ethel because oftentimes we associate Mr. Beck and what he did and Miss Beck, but the truth of the matter is, if you looked at them side by side, you probably see Mr. Beck as sort of your scholarly book educator, and then you'll look at Miss Beck and you'll see the businesswoman. Right? So you got the scholarly and the business mind. And then you look at Mr. Beck and you'll see the Republican. And you'll look at Mrs. Beck and you'll see the Democrat. So they were bipolar different. And she was very strong about whatever she believed in and stood for. And he was very strong about whatever he believed in. And I think she won the war. But suffice it to say, Mrs. Beck is going to come from Morristown, Tennessee. And so she's going to receive her education at Morristown Normal College. And for those of you who know the connection between Morristown and Knoxville College, Mr. Beck's going to come to Knoxville from Camden, Alabama, and he's going to come to Knoxville to go to Knoxville College. And he's going to, Knoxville College and Morristown College are probably going to have this relationship where they're playing against each other in sports and different things like that. Morristown College is really almost a feeder school, if you will, for Knoxville College. We call them HBCUs, or historically Black colleges and universities, because Morristown College is going to be a 2-year college. So many students, when they finish Morristown College, are going to migrate to Knoxville and go to Knoxville College. So certainly Mr. and Ms. Beck will meet each other at probably during that. I can imagine she's probably looking very beautiful, and she's out there maybe cheering the guys on with the football game. He's playing the football and all that kind of stuff, and the rest becomes history. Very strong. Am I still going? Okay. I saw something that I was muted. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Okay. So she is in the summer of 1919, and we're going to talk about that a lot, about what happens in 1919. But interestingly enough, there's going to be the colored orphanage is going to be established. And this is, of course, for indigent children. And it's going to be established at 1835 Brando Avenue. And it's going to be in disarray, and it's about headed for foreclosure. In fact, when Ethel decides to come in and try to help to save that colored orphanage, and so she does. She takes their money and she's able to go in and to save it. She becomes the president of the board of directors, or the manager of the board of directors. And in 1941, they're going to change the name of the colored orphanage to the Ethel Beck Home. And so Mr. and Ms. Beck never had any children, but there was clear that she had a love for children, and she loved animals. A lot of people knew she loved animals as well. But she's going to do that. That orphanage is going to be very important. And I think there's a whole story that we'll have to do one day, Jack, and talk about that orphanage and the great young people who came from that. My mother being one of them, but we won't tell that story today. But she'll serve as the president of the Tennessee Congress of Colored Parents and Teachers. She'll be a great tennis star. She'll have She'll go into tennis tournaments. And she's also going to be the superintendent of the playground at Cal Johnson Park. And for those of you who are familiar with the Cal Johnson story, Caldonia Thackeray Johnson, which many talk about, and then certainly Jack treats it well in this book as well, about some of the history of Cal Johnson. But she'll be the superintendent for the park. So they'll be good friends, and they'll be both working together, ensuring children have a place to play and to be. Mr. Beck is going to he'll be the first African-American U.S. postal worker in the state of Tennessee in 1913. He'll graduate from Knoxville College in 1906. And again, as I said, he'll come from Alabama, but he's going to be the athletic director. He's going to be sports fan. He's going to be an administrator, a teacher. I mean, just a very astute gentleman, very statured man. He'll retire after 29 years from the Postal Services. But another significant thing about Mr. Beck is that he will become one of the co-founders, of course, of the NAACP, which will be founded in Knoxville in 1919. And again, that year just always keeps coming up. It's a very important year in Knoxville history, particularly as it relates to race relations in the African-American story. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Also interesting, he was a lifelong Republican, as I mentioned before, who served as a sergeant in arms at the 1940 National Republican Convention. So lots of things going on. Now, he's going to die in 1969, and she's going to die in 1970. Interesting. I started out this conversation saying I want to talk about how history kind of relates to today. Mr. Beck's going to pass away in 1969. Mrs. Beck's going to be living in the house by herself after he passes away. She is going to leave and get a phone call in the middle of the night that she needs to go to the property at Brando and check on the animals or whatever, what have you, that they think something's going wrong. So she leaves and she goes to check on the property that they own on the other side of town, realizing that she's just probably been lured out of the house. She returns back, and then there's an accident. She's had an accident, and the police are called in. Interestingly enough, there's a police officer that says he smells alcohol on Miss Beck's breath, and and those are those words exactly. So you have an older Black woman that's been arrested now by the police, and she's taken to the police department. Miss Ethel Beck and everyone that knows her, including Mr. Bob Booker, who is our noted historian, and my predecessor, talked about, everybody knew that Ethel Beck did not drink. So that could not have even been a remote possibility. And she hadn't been drinking, but they did arrest her. They put her in jail and left her there overnight. Mrs. Beck was actually having a medical emergency. They will eventually the next day realize that when they go to her, that she is really in bad condition, and they'll take her to the hospital, only to find out that she'll die 3 days later. She'll never return back to the Beck mansion. You know, Black people have been dealing with challenges with respect to law enforcement for many years. And so much of the distrust that automatically comes from a historical perspective, and not just Miss Ethel Beck. I'm only using that as an example because once you develop this mistrust or distrust, it generates for generations. And we find ourselves wrestling with this issue of the police and Black lives. And I give you that to hold in your heart as you look at how events are playing out today, and how we're convicted, oftentimes those of us who have Black and brown skin, before we're even have an opportunity to plead a case. History is the great truth teller. The next slide is, if you don't mind, Paul, is about, so how does Beck become an organization, and what does that have to do with James and Ethel Beck? So as I mentioned, James Beck is going to die in 1969, Ethel in 1970. And then the house is going to be held in an estate, and it's going to become the site of the Urban Renewal Office. And so comes the Urban Renewal Site Office and Urban Renewal. So we're going to transition. People begin to meet in the house after urban renewal takes place. And I'll come back and talk to you a little bit about what urban renewal is. But the people who are Black people who have been displaced as a result of urban renewal will begin to gather and meet in a house and talk about, what they'd like to see happen to their community now that urban renewal has taken place. They meet here in the mansion and they say, well, this would be a great place for us to begin to gather and to meet, to share and to tell our stories, because if we don't share these stories, these pictures, all of this history that we have, it's going to almost be as though it never existed, the people never existed. So they begin to meet here, and they called it the People's Project initially. And as they began to meet here, they said, well, we need, this would be a great place for us to gather and create a museum, a culture center where we can preserve and conserve this history. There was no money. The people had no money. The house, which was in the estate, was going to cost $22,500 in 1974 to purchase. And of course, the people had no money. The mayor of Knoxville at that time was Mayor Kyle Testerman. And so two ladies who were closing down the estate of the Ethel Beck Orphanage said that if you would name the house after the Becks, James and Ethel, that they would donate $20,000 out of the estate for them to purchase it. And so they did, and Mayor Testerman's administration donated the other $2,500, and the people bought the property at 1927 Dandridge Avenue for $22,500 in 1975, and named it after James and Ethel Beck, the Beck Cultural Exchange Center, the place where African American history and culture are preserved. And so that's how we got here today. But I mentioned about urban renewal, often dubbed urban removal or Negro removal. That was established under the Title I Housing Act of 1949. The government granted assistance loans to local communities wanting to eliminate slums, urban blight, and substandard housing. Yet we talk about the devastating consequences that disproportionately targeted minority communities through eminent domain. This resulted in the displacement of many families. Urban renewal will continue until about 1974, but the ramifications of urban renewal continues. And so urban renewal was not unique to Knoxville, Tennessee. It was happening all over the country. And so the next slide, Paul. This is an exhibit, a permanent exhibit that we have here at the Beck called Urban Renewal / Urban Removal. And this is the African American community before urban renewal. And I say African American community because this is predominantly where African Americans are going to be living and working and going to church. And while there will be other non-Black people living here, predominantly this is your African American community. But in Knoxville, urban renewal is going to go in 3 phases. And the projects are going to relocate and displace many families, many businesses, many churches and schools. And so by the end of it, we're going to have what we see on the next slide, and I'll come back to this one, what we look at today. From the same vantage point of what urban renewal has been replaced with. You'll see in the lower right-hand corner a picture of the Civic Coliseum. So that'll sort of be beginning phases of urban renewal. And there you'll see actually to build the Civic Coliseum alone took 72 residences, 9 businesses, and 2 churches were raised just to build that. So you can see the interstate coming in, and you can see all of the development in downtown. If you go back to that slide right before, you'll see that when we talk about Knoxville's urban renewal projects, indeed, there was slum. In fact, Mr. Booker talks about the bottoms. And in fact, Beck has a book called, his latest book, From the Bottom Up, which talks about his life having grown up in the bottoms in that area under the viaduct there where it would flood. And so there was definitely some, areas that needed immediate attention in these urban areas of our community. And how they would have to try to get up, take the long route. I don't know if you can see. water tower at the top of the picture. There's a water tower right up under the word renewal there, Knoxville Urban Renewal. If you look there, yeah, thanks a lot, Paul. That is the top of the hill where Green Elementary School sits today. So that might give you some kind of indication of where they would go to school from the bottom down here at the bottom, and the houses where they're flooding kind of below in the bottoms of that. So there was lots of dilapidated houses. There was some areas that needed. But I want to talk to you about urban renewal in today's perspective, because today we talk about gentrification. And I always want to talk about history and then in terms of what it looks like today. So all of this is going to get wiped out in order to build what we see today. When we talk about what happened here, the Act, Title I Housing Act, or HUD, as I mentioned before, was issued in 1949. But if you'll notice, I say it was in 1959 that urban renewal began. And this is one of the things that when I talk to people who, you always can talk to people who tell you the stories of what historians talk about, what the records record, what history writes, or you can talk to people who lived history. And Beck does that. We have lots of oral histories where we talk to people, tell us what you remember about urban renewal. And I was talking to a young man, and he was telling me the story of urban renewal. And he asked me this question. He said, Renee, when did urban renewal start? And I was like, 1959. And he said, no. I said, okay, yeah, so the act was in 1949. He said, that's when urban renewal started. He said, because always, he said in 1959 is when the first building in Knoxville came down. But urban renewal started first because something happens before a building comes down. Before we tear down a community, particularly when we talk about Black people, there was a mindset that was torn down. We have to break the spirit first. That's what racism is. It wasn't about the buildings and the places. First, I have to tear down your mind. And so he tells me this story in 1949, right after the act came out, people heard that something is getting ready to happen. 10 years before the first building came down, they knew something was happening, something was going on, and fear crept into their spirits. So you have a school, for example, high school, elementary school, which is in urban renewal. And in 1949, 1950, that school is an elementary school that goes to 6th grade. And he tells this story after 1950, after 1950, 51, it goes to 6th grade. After 1950, when those kids leave 6th grade and the next kids come back, high school goes to 5th grade. The next year, the 5th graders go out, high school goes to 4th grade. And the next year, 3rd grade, 2nd grade. People are horrified. What's happening? What's happening to my school? What's happening to my community? It's coming. Always before the first building comes down, oftentimes the mental psyche comes down, and we have to break people down so that we can then break the buildings down, because that's easy. That indeed was always the issue with slavery. If I can break your mind, if I can break your spirit, breaking your back is easy. And so one of the things when we look at gentrification today, because people ask me all the time, Renee, how do you feel about gentrification? How do you feel about what's happening now with so many of the communities? And I should say to you, I want to be very transparent, because I'm in a space and place right now where I want you to know who I am and what I believe in. I'm a native Knoxvillian. And I'm for real native. You know how you can have those natives like Miss Jackson, who will be 100 on Christmas Eve. She's only been here since she was 6. So she doesn't count. I think that's the rules around here. I want you to know I was born in Knoxville, Tennessee. Even went to the University of Tennessee. So I am born and raised, and I want you to even know that I was born and raised in East Knoxville. I want you to know that because I want you to understand how much I love this community. I live right now in the house that I grew up in when I was 8 years old. The first house I ever lived in, we lived in the projects, what we called them back in the day, or public housing. And then when we moved into a house, I live in that same house in Park Ridge right now that I live And when I look around my neighborhood, my community, my brothers and sisters who don't look like me, they ask me, Renee, what do you think about your community and how things, and remember, I went to Park Lowry Elementary School and I had to tell them a story. I don't have anything left in my neighborhood anymore. I went to Park Lowry Elementary School, it's gone. The year I was supposed to go to Park Junior High School, and we couldn't wait to get there. That's like, you know, to get to Park Junior High School was the thing you were living and breathing for. And the year my brother, who's a year older than me, I was supposed to be a 6th grader, a senior at Park Lowry Elementary School, and he was supposed to be in the 7th grade at Park Junior High School. And that was the year they closed Park Junior. We didn't even know about that until the summer. Well, what do we do? Where do we go to school? We had no idea. You know that there was absolutely no provisions made for those of us on that side of Magnolia Avenue. So the Black kids, all of us who lived on that Black side of Magnolia Avenue said, well, where do we go to school? And they said, well, you should go to Vine. Vine is the next closest school. Well, Vine was too far for those kids on that side to walk, and they did not have a bus for us. So they said, well, just go wherever you want to go. We're going to talk about that some other time. But suffice to say, I'm going to transfer public school system. They have to transfer us on the public school bus, the public transit. Thank you, the public transit, and we'll be bused all over the city. But I said to my neighbors, so I can't point to any of those things that I was looking forward to being a part of. It got gone. I love that not all of my neighbors look like me. I love that we're all friends and we have a beautiful community. But I grew up where everybody knew everybody, everybody watched out for everybody, everybody knew each other's names. Here's what I don't like about gentrification and urban renewal. I don't like when we displace people, when we displace things because we want them. That's not fair. I like people coming into a neighborhood and a community and being a part of it, but I don't want to disenfranchise the very people who are indigenous to the neighborhoods and to the communities. And so as long as we can do, and I think that's why I'm excited about the projects that are taking place right now in our city, particularly the baseball field and the downtown projects. I'm really excited about that because there's nothing there. I'm excited about the Beck Cultural Corridor, to tell you about that. I'm excited about the Science Museum. I'm excited about anything that comes to our community that brings something back and doesn't take something away and opens up the opportunity for all of us to engage and to have a beautiful neighborhood and community. So right now, where we're developing, it's already gone. Urban renewal is already taking place. So if we can at least put something back and infuse capital and economic development back into a very important community, I'm grateful for that. So I'm gonna move on. So what is this Beck Cultural Corridor that I mentioned? And so when we talk about the Beck Cultural Corridor, it's all about reclaiming this history, right? And so one of the things, even with the baseball field and some of those other places, I'm really grateful because, you know, Randy Boyd understands how important Black history is. And he said, Renee, let's help you be a part of reclaiming some of those spaces. So even at the baseball field, let's talk about some of the great baseball players that were here in Knoxville, because many of you may or may not know, but there was sorry, y'all, I'm gonna get some water. I'm a preacher, but I do about 4 or 5 closings. I come back. The Negro League Baseball, the Giants that were here in Knoxville. And so being able to tell the narrative and the stories of some of the greats who came through here. So we'll be able to do that. We'll be able, that's what reclaiming history is. It's about telling the stories of the great people. And I'll tell you another great story, which I love, and you may have read this in the paper when I was telling Randy about urban renewal and about these amazing places that are here. I was telling him about the story of the Gym Theater and where it is. And for those of you who may or may not know, the Gym Theater was a Black theater in downtown Knoxville. And when Black folks couldn't go to the Tennessee Theater, for example, downtown, and the Bijou Theater, which is open, it was the first theater open, integrated, but segregated within the theater. It had the second for Black people. The Gym Theater was the Black theater for Black folks. And where it would have been located, the last place where people remember it is where the doggy park is today. So if you know where the doggy park is at the bottom of Summit Hill, that's where the Gym Theater is. And I was telling Randy, for example, about, that's where the Gym Theater used to be. Here's a picture of what the Gym Theater looked like. Here's the seats. Here are some of the stories that the people tell me about going to the movies and going to the Gym Theater and things like that. And he loved the story, and he loved hearing the history. He said, people need to know this history. They need to be able to go to the spaces and be able to point to the history. So the development company actually that is developing the baseball field is called the Gym Development Company, hence the Gym Theater. And of course, a diamond for baseball is a gym. So we use that name. So we're excited. That's the kind of things I think we do to reclaim history. Begin to tell the stories, have people talking about it. It's not my story. It's not my people's story. It is our story. And so I hope that you will begin to tell the stories as well, so that those edifices that once stood as monuments to the struggles of early leaders that are no longer visible today, that their story will live on and that history will continue to live. So what is the Beck Cultural Corridor? The Beck Cultural Corridor, you can go, Paul, is located throughout Knoxville, but of course, we want to start with the part that's the next slide, thanks. That is, that would be where urban renewal started. So while we want to begin to look at sites and places and locations throughout the region, we want to begin with a special section called the urban renewal section, so we can begin to put signs out. You can use your phone and technology to go to different places and be able to see it. And I'll tell you a little bit more about it. So hit the next slide. So the purpose is really to tell the stories. That's a picture there of the Gym Theater. I use that as an example. That's an older picture, and you can see the tower, the police tower there, and the water tower on top. You can't see it very good on this picture, but nevertheless, the Beck Culture Corridor is really about bringing to life, taking it off the pages of the book, making it so you don't have to come physically. And even before urban renewal, before the pandemic, COVID-19 started, we began to think about how we want to do museum. I want people to be able to go all over the city, the community, the region, do biking tours, walking tours, and see where these places were, and be able to use your own technology to see pictures and some history of what was in the section previously known as urban renewal and all throughout. So if you go to the next slide, there's sort of an outline of what we're looking to do. So the Beck Culture Center is looking to do this Beck Culture Corridor where we have these historical markers and street signs. We start with urban renewal, but again, using technology. And we want to spread out to Knoxville and the surrounding area, all over the region, because absent of Beck, there's no single African-American history or culture center in the region doing what we do. Haley Heritage Square, which is a very important part of the Alex Haley statue, the only 13-foot bronze statue of Pulitzer Prize winner Alex Haley, really treating that as part of the Beck Culture Corridor, working with the city so we can really engage that space. We just have a lot of wonderful spaces in Knoxville and history that we want people to come and to see. And obviously, one of the things that Jack introduced this conversation about was the Delaney Museum at Beck. And so I want to talk a little bit about that because I think that's important. The Delaney family, Beck, you can go, Paul, Beck always talks about history in terms of the whole family. Beauford Delaney is going to be a world-renowned artist, but the family, Delia Johnson was actually born into slavery on February 1st of 1865, and that is the mother. She's to the far right. She's the matriarch of the family. And then she is going to marry Samuel Delaney, and he is going to be a circuit preacher in the Methodist Episcopal churches, yes, thank you, in Knoxville. And they will marry and they'll settle here in Knoxville. The Delaneys, Mr. and Miss Delaney will have 10 children. And of the 10 children that they will have, only 4 will survive to adulthood. And so seated here in the picture, is Samuel Emery. Samuel Emery is the elder one to the very far left standing. He is the elder brother, and he's going to be very important. So remember Samuel, because we're going to talk about him when we talk about the Delaney Museum at Beck, because he's going to be the one that's going to own the property there. And then seated there down the first to your left, if you're looking, yeah, thank you. If you're looking at the screen, is going to be Joseph Delaney, and then August is the elder sister. She will pass away as well. Beaufort, and then the baby there is Naomi. She will also pass away. This picture is circa about 1908, and Joseph is probably about 3 or 4 years old there, and Beaufort is probably 6 or 7. So they're about 3 years apart in age, and so that's about their age at that time. And so this is the picture that we have of a few of the family members during this time. And actually that picture was hanging in the house. We found it under some rubble, but that would have been the picture that would have been still in the house when we purchased the home. And the home, the original home, if you'll go to the next slide, that we purchased, is at 815 East Vine Avenue. So this is the original home place that Mr. and Miss Delaney will rear their children. And this will have been on Vine Street, which is a significant part of urban renewal. So this will go during urban renewal. Back to urban renewal again. Urban renewal was very important. And when we talk about the house, I'm probably, how much faster do I need to go, Jack? Sorry, I'm good. Okay. So prior to urban renewal, okay, thank you. John Samuel. So remember, the parents will rear them. This is the only house that they're going to live in at 815 East Vine Avenue. When Mr. Delaney passes away, the father passes away, and he'll die in 1919. Interesting year. And when he passes away, he's going to, Miss Delaney is still there, and the only children left are Beaufort and Joseph. The elder brother Samuel is going to have moved away, gotten married, but when dad passes away, he's going to come back home to help take care of Beaufort and Joseph. He'll come back home and he'll stay in this house, and he will build a barbershop in the back of this house. And that's the big deal in urban renewal. Many Black families are going to have homes that are also going to dub as the business. So when you look at urban renewal and you come in and say, okay, well, this is the value of a home, what it did not take into account, or what it did not do in terms of appraised value, was understanding that the home was also the business. And so when you took the home, you also took the business. And one of the things I didn't mention about urban renewal also was that during the 1949 Act, there was no such thing as a relocation package. As it is today, if the government has to employ eminent domain, the law is completely different today. But suffice it to say, that was not the law in 1949. So the house is going to dub as the business and the home. Many people who remember Mr. Delaney that are still living here in Knoxville today, they'll always say, oh, you mean Beaufort and Joseph's dad. So they will remember Samuel Delaney, the patriarch, or the elder brother, Samuel Emery Delaney, as the father, but he is really the elder brother. But I promise you, to this day, I have to argue people that, no, that was their dad. He was the elder, or he was the patriarch of the family, no doubt, and he did come back home to help rear them, but he was the elder brother, and he will come back and help take care of them, and to help with the family needs, he will also start the barbershop business. So many people who still live in Knoxville today remember getting their hair cut by Mr. Delaney, as they would have called, as they call him. There at the house. He is going to then, so this is the last home place. We'll go to the next slide and just talk real briefly about these two brothers who are really great, particularly Beaufort Delaney, who's going to become, who many say is probably the greatest abstract painter of the 20th century. I think it's always important, and this is just as we're talking about learning how to talk about Black history. Let me encourage you, whenever you talk about great artists, or whenever you talk about Black people in general who were great, can I invite you not to say, African-American artist, Beaufort and Joseph Delaney, da 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 da. I want you to say, great artist, the greatest artist, Beaufort Delaney, who happened to be an African-American, right? So the first thing that he's a great artist, not because he's Black. And I think we don't understand sometimes how we dishonor history and even Black people when we put it in a box as though they're great within a Black context. You know, at some point we have to begin to look at people, regardless of their color, as just great in whatever their profession, whether it's music, whether it's art, whether it's history, whatever it is, these are just great people who were great at what they do. And then we can tell the story about who they were. They were African Americans that were from right here in Knoxville, Tennessee. And that makes the story even more wonderful. But these are great artists, not great Black artists. But Beaufort Delaney is going to become among the greatest abstract artists of the 20th century. I'm excited and I'm very proud because back in we'll talk about that in a minute, but back in 2016, there was a world exhibition in Paris, France. A lady by the name of Monique, who was there as one of our partners in Paris, who really helped us discover Beaufort in a way that many of us had not discovered him, did the first world exhibition there in Paris, France. A small delegation from Knoxville, including David at the KMA, went to Paris, France for this exhibition, and it was fabulous. And David and Steve Wicks came back to Knoxville and said, Renee, we're ready. We've got to do something big in Knoxville for Beaufort and Joseph, for Beaufort Delaney, and make him world. They didn't know where Knoxville, Tennessee was, and they just kept talking about this little place called Knoxville, Tennessee, and nobody knows we exist, and we are the home to this great artist, this great world-renowned artist. How do we make them great here? And immediately, the Beck Cultural Exchange Center, the East Tennessee History Center, and the Knoxville Museum of Art entered into a tri-party memorandum of understanding. We're going to make them great here. We did our very first event in April of 2016 here at the Beck. Jack, we do, you know, operas at Beck. We do expeditions for Beaufort Delaney at Beck. It's just great. And so Steve came and did a fantastic job talking about art and introducing, if you will, to some and presenting to others this great artist of Beaufort Delaney. Many Knoxvillians will remember Joseph Delaney because he'll come back to Knoxville, be an artist in residence at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And so many people here will remember him more so than Beaufort. Who is also a great artist in his own right as well. And so we celebrate the rich history of Knoxville, and I'm telling you, they're inspiring another generation of artists, and particularly Beaufort. It's like I'm not an artist, but I have fallen in love with the concept, the ideas, the vision, the light, and I see why people fall in love with Beaufort Delaney. So in February, as Jack mentioned, there was a lot of things going on, including the University of Tennessee did an international symposium with Beaufort Delaney and James Baldwin. And so we've just got a lot of things going. We've got a great Delaney Society organization that works together. We got great people working with us. And I might just mention, those were the original groups that started working on this, and we've been working, and our group has grown. Including the Downtown Rotary, which Miss Towns Osborne has been a very strong supporter of this. She loves it. Miss Sylvia Peters has been a strong supporter. So I don't want to leave anybody out. I just want you to know there's a lot of people working in the background who really believe in the Delaney Project, and I want to share that with you. But if we go to the next slide, you'll see a picture of a historic marker, because the home that was on Vine Street, the original home place that was at 815 East Vine Street, that marker that you see right there is actually approximately the location on East Vine Street where the original home place would have been located. And so if you'll notice, on one side of the marker is the history of Beaufort Delaney, on the other side is Joseph. And to give you your bearings, this is on Summit Hill, right behind Commissioner Gill. If you'll point with me, Paul, over here behind Commissioner Gill, over to the far right. There you go. Behind her is the Waggles store on the corner of Summit Hill. And then if you look at the other picture here in the upper corner, you see Steve Wicks there. That is the credit union So you can see exactly where it is. So it sits right out in front of the credit union, which is right up from the Waggles on Summit Hill. So that is where 815 East Vine Avenue is, right in that general area. And so I wanted you to see that so that you can see where the original home place is, because of course it no longer exists. And so what does exist is, if you go to the next slide, is, isn't this lovely? This property at 1935 Dandridge Avenue. And so the elder brother, Samuel Delaney, the patriarch of the family, who many thinks the father, he is going to purchase this house in about 1948. And he's going to decide that purchase this home, and this is going to become the home place. So this is where Buford's mom's going to live, because he's still with the mother, he and his wife, and she'll live here with him. And also that house will, they'll still use the 815 house as the barbershop. So many people will remember still going to the old house for the barbershop. Of course, when urban renewal comes down, that will come down. So this will become the home place. And when Beaufort comes home, Joseph comes home, this is where they're going to stay. So this will be the last home. And we are excited because Beck acquired this property literally about 6 months after I've been with Beck since July 2014. We acquired this property in 2015. As soon as I got here, it was one of the first things that I did. But if I can be totally honest and transparent with you, I thought the Delaney's was Miss Alfreda Delaney, because I remember people used to talk about her all the time. She was everybody's teacher, right? And so I'm thinking they're talking about that. Oh yeah, I know the Delaney's. No, there's apparently 3 different groups of Black families in the Delaney's, and none of them are related in Knoxville. So I didn't acquire this property because I thought Beaufort Delaney was this amazing artist, or that that Delaney family was this amazing family. I acquired it because of the way it looks right now. It was an eyesore, it was blight, and it shared a driveway with the Beck Cultural Exchange Center. And then I said, I've got to do something. Safety and security is at stake here. And so we acquired the property in May of 2015. And then I came to know all about the Delaneys, the family, the history. I began to do my own research, talking to the family, and it's just been a beautiful transition to get to know that something wonderful is going to come out of this. And so we are very excited about this. I want to say this too. The Delaney family has always been involved with Beck since the very beginning. They were involved with Beck because they were part of the urban renewal process. In fact, it's going to be Samuel Delaney who is going to be the one to help establish the Beck Cultural Exchange Center. There's on October the 13th, 1974, a meeting is held to find out what we need to do with our community in terms of creating a center and to study it. There was about 100 people in attendance, and a motion was made and seconded to develop a steering committee to establish a cultural center. Samuel Delaney will second that motion. We have all of the minutes and the records of that. And then he will be a member of 15 people who are unanimously selected to decide what we should create. And they are the ones who decided we needed to establish a center, the Beck Cultural Exchange Center. Also, when Beck opens just a few months later in 1975, who's the guest artist going to be at the grand opening in 1975 with over 500 people here at the Beck and dignitaries, and it's going to be none other than Joseph Delaney. He will be the featured artist of the day. So they've always been rooted in our history. They're a part of us, and so we feel like we're bringing them back home and doing what we're doing. So they're a very important part of what we're calling the Beck Cultural Corridor, and they would be on top of. So the next picture, Paul, we're calling it. This is the last remaining ancestral home that Beaufort and Joseph are going to call home. This home was built in 1910, and it does, as Jack said, it's right next door to Beck. We share a driveway, so we're in the. History has not been torn down. History has not been destroyed. It's not been erased. It's been preserved and it's been saved. And now we can tell the story for generations to come. And so if you look at the next slide, we can tell the story, and we're calling it Delaney Museum at Beck. And that's a rendering of what the Delaney Museum And for those of you who might like to take a virtual tour, I want to thank our architect. And let me just say, the East Tennessee Community Design Center was very instrumental in getting this project off the ground for me. I certainly could not have done it without them. So I want to acknowledge the East Tennessee Community Design Center. And I love them. I used to be on the board many years ago, but I will always sing their praises. They do so much good work for so many different organizations in our community. So I'm very proud of their work. But I'm also very proud of Barbara McMurray Architects. Kelly Hedden, who's a very dear friend of mine, is helping us with the design work. So what you're looking at is a rendering of what it might look like. And we're in the middle of working on this now, and I'll tell you a little bit about it on the other side. But the next slide, I'll let you take somewhat of a virtual tour of what it might look like. And this is about 1.5 minutes, close to 2 minutes. So you're welcome to take a walk inside. You can see the Beck on the side over there. And then you're walking in the front door here. As you walk in, it looks a lot like the building style, of course, of the Beck Cultural Exchange Center, the original Beck House here. So this would be the opening of the inside of the main space on the main level. And as you turn and you begin to go down to the hallway there, you'll go into the kitchen area. Again, where we can have prep area and food and different spaces. This is all still on the ground floor. As you turn and go up the staircase there, you'll get to the second floor. And on the second floor, interesting, you're going to see an apartment up here. So we actually have an apartment so that we can do an artist in residency apartment so that we can bring in great artists and have a place to stay. And I might, as you're watching that, mention to you, and I'll be sending this, I hope you guys will all sign up for the Beck e-newsletter. We have a great artist coming in, Steve A. Prince. We're partnering with the University of Tennessee. He's going to be doing an exhibition that is starting tomorrow. So I'll be sending out some stuff. All the big stuff happens in another week or two, but I'll be sending out some notices where we're partnering with them on that. It's called the Living Epistle. But the idea is that we can bring in great artists to really study art and to be able to have a place to stay. So the artist in residency upstairs, the apartment that's there is great in terms of being able to have a sustainable model of having, income coming in from the residency program that will be upstairs, bringing in great artists to study Beaufort's work and other works that we can be exposed to, our young people and our artists that are here in the community. Beck is also looking to acquire some pieces of its own, so we'll have some original Delaney's in the home. We partner again with the Knoxville Museum of Art and the estate to continue to drive tourism here. We would have an ombudsman, a person who would oversee the Delaney House for us, who would be all things Delaney, so that we can encourage people from all over the world to come, and we'll know everything that's happening in the Delaney community. So if there are artists coming, we'll have to encourage tours to come during those times. If there's special exhibits at the KMA, we're going to be doing all things Delaney. So we're very excited about all the things that can take place. So if you can see over on the side there, Paul, that's the Beck House, so you can see how close we really are to that. And that would become a contiguous campus so that it's one big, huge campus. So that's part of the renderings that we're working on. I should also say, I hope that you would like to join us in this project. We need support so that we can acquire some originals, also so we can have a sustainable model. So if you would help us in terms of programming for the Delaney House and continuing to make it a model, because I do want to report to you that Beck has been working really hard with our partners and folks who really care about this project to raise. This project is $850,000, and I'm pleased to tell you that from a capital dollar standpoint, we have raised the funds for this project. So we would encourage you to join us in supporting this project, because we're in, we want to make it as successful as it can be. So we want to put in some great projects. A couple of things that I want to make this house be very social conscious. One of the things I want us, whether we're COVID, pre-COVID, or post-COVID, we want to put in systems that will help with the air and the airflow. So we're looking at all kinds of models that will be this new thing where we can say it will be a COVID-friendly museum. and we're also looking at social justice in terms of environmental issues to ensure that we're being conscious of our environmental issues. And then finally, I just want to close out with the 1919, because that was such an amazing year in history here in Knoxville. So the night in Knoxville, for those of you who may or may not know, I won't go into all the details, but there was the race riots of 1919, and one Maurice Mays was at the center of that. Maurice Mays was convicted of, he was a Black man, convicted of killing a white woman, and the city goes upside down. And 1919 is such a volatile year because for those of you who know, all over the country, they termed it the Red Summer because there was so much bloodshed with respect to race riots and racial tension. A racial epidemic took place during that summer. And for Knoxville, it sort of culminated in August. So we are just over 101 years removed from that, to the day almost literally, when that happens, and Knoxville's race climate takes a turn for the worse. And so I won't go in, this is what I want to say. Many people have tried to get Maurice Mays pardoned over the years, including former ambassador to Poland and mayor of Knoxville, Victor Ashe, and my predecessors, Mr. Avon Ross and Mr. Robert Booker. Many people have said Maurice Mays didn't do this. This was something brewing that had nothing to do with him. And I will mention that no one believed that he had done, and they tried to do a pardon. My hope is to do an exoneration, and so I put together a legal team, and headed by retired attorney Charles Fells, who's also a retired Episcopalian priest and a very dear friend of mine, to show that not only was it unjust and wrong to convict Maurice Mays and then to kill him over supposedly having killed this, but also legally that it was the wrong thing to do. And my hope is to have him exonerated 100 years later, and only the governor can do that. So I hope you will support us, and I invite you to visit the BECK website to hear more about it. But this is so important to me because I believe that Black lives matter. I do. And I also believe that if we understood that they mattered 100 years ago when a Black man was convicted wrongly of killing a white woman, then we wouldn't be perhaps where we are today. So even though we can't change history, perhaps we have an opportunity to atone for it. And so Maurice Mays was done. What's interesting is I've got so many people who says, why hasn't this been done before? I don't know. But even Miss Birdie Lindsay is actually the white woman who was murdered, who was killed. So I have even had her family to reach out to me and sign the exoneration for Maurice Mays, who said they've never believed that he killed Maurice Mays. And their family tells the story of what really happened. So many people, there's no one, I've never talked to a single person who said Maurice Mays did this. And either a historian or an individual who's part of the family, or an individual that's part of the story. And unfortunately, it left a stain in Knoxville that we can't erase. And if you go to the next slide, Mr. Etter, Joe Etter, was killed during the race riots. He was a Great War veteran, and he had come home after the war, which abruptly ended in 1918. And so the reason I used his picture is because so much about Black history we don't have pictures for, we don't have names for, but when we do, I think it's important that we show their pictures and show their names. Miss Mary Etter, Beck did an oral history project in 1979 where the average age of the people that we interviewed were 80 years and older. Miss Mary Etter was the wife of Mr. Joe Etter, and we have her voice on tape, and we'll be having that as part of some of the things that we'll be sharing with you during this virtual world that we live in. And you'll be able to hear the voices. None of those are alive today, but we have the voices of those folks. And Miss Mary Etter talks about the night, the race riots, and what she remembers happening, including the night that her husband was killed by the National Guard, which was called into Knoxville. Again, this was a Great War veteran who was, by the way, not buried in a veteran cemetery. He was buried in an unmarked grave and in the Black cemetery. And so suffice it to say, I think when we talk about this, we've got to right some wrongs of history, some things that we just didn't get right. And as a result of it, we're still all those years ago when we had our race. At the same time, and I know, Jack, you can talk about this much better than I can, but we know in 1918 we got the Spanish flu epidemic. We got 1918 the race riots, epidemic of the Red Summer. It almost seems like history just repeats itself, and we're right back here again. So I've literally studied both of those issues, and I'm just looking at it and it's blowing my mind that we've already been here. Suffice it to say, if you go down to the next picture, I just came up with this picture because we're commemorating 100 years of suffrage, of women's right to vote. And the suffrage movement, 100 years is in 2020, from 1920. But in Knoxville, because suffrage is on the federal level, in Knoxville, women are going to go to the polls to vote for the first time in the summer of 1919. So I want you to keep in mind several things that happened in that summer. In the beginning of the summer of, in the beginning of 1919, in the beginning of August of 1919, there's some tension with race relations that begin to happen, and the Klan comes to town here in Knoxville. The Ku Klux Klan is here. And then about 3 weeks later, the NAACP is organized, and I mentioned at the top of the show that Mr. Beck is a co-founder of the NAACP because race tensions are starting to get high. And so the NAACP begins in August of 1919 here in Knoxville, of which Mr. Beck will be the first treasurer, secretary of the NAACP. And right after that, you're going to have the race riots. And August 30th is when all of that's going to take place with Maurice Mays and Miss Birdie Lindsay. And then a week later, you're going to have an election. Any of this sound familiar? It's not intended to, but you're going to have an election about 6 days later, and it's a mayoral election. And the night before all of the things happen, Maurice Mays is giving out poll taxes. And in the Black community, and he's responsible to secure the Black vote. And so women are going to go to the polls to vote. The picture that you're looking at on the screen is a picture actually, which I think is the cutest little thing. This picture is actually Miss Roberta Childs. Miss Roberta Childs is actually the mother of Judge William H. Hasties. Judge William H. Hasties is going to be the first Black he's going to be the first Black federal judge in the United States. And he's also going to become the first governor of the U.S. Virgin Islands. And so this is his mother. And so he will be born here in Knoxville. And she is always, they talk about this woman, and they talked about how she was just a staunch advocate for civil rights. And she pretty much didn't back down for anything. And she taught that to her young son, who will later become the judge, William H. Hasties, of which Beck has a room dedicated to. This picture is a picture of Miss Childs. When they left Knoxville in about 1915, her husband will go to D.C. She's in front of the People's Drug Store in Washington, D.C., demonstrating against discrimination in the workplace. And she's fighting Jim Crow laws. And so I use this picture because when we talk about suffrage, I'm a member of a Black sorority. It's called Delta Sigma Theta sorority, for those of you who may or may not know. And in Black sororities and fraternities, it's a lifetime membership. I'm a member specifically of that sorority because that sorority is going to begin in 1913. And they specifically start so that they can be part of the movement, of the women's movement and the march with the women. My sisters who started that, 22 founders who started that organization, are the first Black organization to march with the women for suffrage. And yet they're going to be relegated to the back of the line. So the women said that you can march, but if you are the Black women, we're told to march in the back. And my sisters were that. And I wanted to be part of a sorority that stood up for what was right. I struggle with celebrating suffrage like many people because so many of my Black brothers, my Black sisters are not part of the narrative because there are so many names in the history books that we don't have for Black people because that's not how it's recorded. We've got to find and dig and find the names. And I'm using that as an example because while we have names of white women who stood for suffrage, extraordinary women, I might add, who stood for suffrage, who stood for civil rights, who stood for great we know that Black women were there. They were standing on the front lines and they were fighting. Their names are not recorded in the books, but they were there. So I need us to put their face, we know what they look like. So even if their names aren't recorded, we know what they look like. And I say that because in Knoxville, if you go to the newspaper, September the 6th, 1919, the Knoxville News Sentinel writes this story about the first day that women will go to the polls to vote in Knoxville. And it'll say, and I might mention just for history's sake, the very first Black woman to vote in Knoxville is Agnes Sadler. She's the first, Ethel Downer is the first to register to vote, but Agnes Sadler is the first Black woman to vote. Now, after that, the women's names are just going to be called colored. And there's a story in the paper on that first day of voting on September the 6th of 1919. And it talks about this story about, it was a relatively uneventful day. Women came out to the polls to vote for the first time in Knoxville. And the men talked about how they just really don't want to be any more poll workers anymore, or poll judges, if they have to deal with women at the polls. And there's this story, it was uneventful except for this one ward. And there's a situation where a old colored woman walks into the precinct to vote with her daughter. And when she gets ready to cast her ballot and to vote, she asks her daughter to help her to register her vote. And when the poll judge says, no, you're not allowed to have anyone help you with your voting card. And she proceeds to tell him that, she's going to need help with her ballot. There's an issue, arguing ensues. They call the main poll judge to find out, can someone else cast someone else's ballot? Long story short, what happens during that day is he says, well, I don't have to, he said, the poll judge can cast the ballot. And the poll judge says, no, I'm not going to cast the ballot because I only cast the ballot in the fact where people can't see. And he says to the old colored woman, and seeing is that you saw your way into the poll unassisted, then you ought to be able to see your way to vote. And so later, after about 15 minutes of arguing, they finally determined that he will have to cast the vote for her. So she tells him who to vote for, who she wants marked on her ballot. She watches him as he puts it in the ballot box. I tell you this story for this reason. I look at that old colored woman and I see someone who could be my grandmother. And I think about her and I think about what an honor it was for her to walk in there thinking, I'm living in a time that I never thought I would see. The day when I would get to vote. I assume in 1919 that this old colored woman could not read or write. Yet she was very proud. She walked in there and she wanted to cast her vote. Why couldn't she read or write? That's the next question. She wasn't allowed to. And yet she was humiliated. And she took her daughter with her, hoping that she could probably have avoided that. I say that to you because it is so important that we recognize there are extraordinary people who look like me, who have fought and who have stood for this country, and we have not acknowledged that. It is all of our history. And in suffrage, and in voting, and in equal rights, all of it's in our history books. We must revisit history, we must learn it, and then we must share it so we aren't repeating some of the horrors of yesterday. I think I'm done.